So, are you worried about grooming gangs? Are you concerned about two-tier policing? Then it turns out you might have fallen under the spell of an extremist right-wing narrative. Tom, this is from a leaked sort of rapid review from the Home Office taken in the wake of the horrendous riots in Southport last year. It's come up with a number of recommendations, as well as hinting that some quite normal opinions of right-wing extremists. It suggested expanding the definition of extremism quite broadly, and also recording lots of non-crime hate incidents.
Yeah.
What have you made of this?
Well, first of all, we should give it its proper name, which is that it was a rapid analytical sprint into the question of extremism, that's your brain on Mandarin ideology, isn't it, to call something like that?
To accompany the Oxford-Cambridge Growth Corridor
exactly.
champion.
Where they come up with this stuff, I don't know. But yeah, this leaked review, Policy Exchange got their hands on it and effectively blew it up before it was even published because of the fact that it did have these outrageous passages in it, which suggested that first of all, the issue of grooming gangs, which they refer to as alleged cases of group-based sexual exploitation. Again, more jargon, but also that word alleged has really stuck in the craw for obvious reasons, given how much that debate has really come back to the focus. Also, this idea of two-tier policing as being a kind of right-wing extremist trope. It's almost like a caricature of what people feared the Home Office and our counter-extremism services had become. It basically vindicates the William Shawcross review from 2023, who said that the problem with the way in which the British state deals with extremism is that it's far too much focused on far-right extremism, to the point that even the general stuff of right-wing commentary has become suspect in their eyes, and this completely vindicates that. And also the fact that because of that skew, it's not dealing with the fundamentals, which is our primary threat, which of course is Islamist extremism, which despite being that primary threat only makes up about 11% of prevent referrals these days, which is absolutely insane. So the fact that they had to distance themselves from it so quickly, in a weird way, is a sign of progress. This isn't an independent report. This was people working in the Home Office with Yvette Cooper and Dan Jarvis day to day. The fact that they've had to distance themselves from it so quickly, I think, is indicative of the fact that the debate has moved on. People have realised, even though the Labour Party have made a dog's dinner of these issues and tended to alienate people when they've tried to address them, I think they know they can't get away with this official tendency to try and demonise mainstream opinions on a lot of these issues and to try and deflect attention away from where the real threat lies. So it was another disgraceful chapter in the story of our dealing with this particular issue. But I think that the speed with which they had to drop it was interesting and different to what we might have seen in the more recent past.
Yeah. Miriam, what have you made of it?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Tom. I was pleased that they disowned it so quickly. Whether they disowned it because Policy Exchange got their hands on it and shone a light on it or not, I don't know. But it does reveal what our civil servants are thinking, and also that we are living in two parallel political spheres in this country.
Yeah.
We've got what you might call the progressive left and the kind of common sense centre right, and they genuinely think differently about issues that we might think are just so obvious, but it's obvious in a different way. And I think that's what's so difficult, because how do you have a meaningful persuasive argument with people who just see things in such a different way? So, and it is hugely concerning, but I suspect at the root of all this is the left are now, they're a rabbit in the headlights. It's been proven that multiculturalism has failed. All this time we've been saying that all cultures are equal, all cultures are equally valid, diversity is our strength. I mean, that is even on the 50p piece. It says Britain was built on diversity, which is obviously rubbish, but that's the level of kind of indoctrination that we've been subjected to. And now those in the kind of civil service class are realising that everybody's eyes have been opened, that it isn't working, but nobody's actually got a solution. Because the problem is that people are saying, well, we just need better integration. I'm not sure that is the answer, because there are communities, Orthodox Jewish communities, some Hindu communities, Chinese university students who aren't integrated, who do live in their own, separate societies, almost own schools, own shops. But they're not a problem. I'm not saying it's ideal that we have a society where there are some groups that aren't integrated, but it's not a problem. But this is a problem. Is that because some Muslim communities are incompatible, or at least the values that some of them display, like very obviously the Pakistani men involved in these cases, are actually incompatible with Western liberal values, and no amount of integration is actually going to solve that. So I suspect that there's some rapid backpedaling going on in the establishment class. What the heck do we do now the lid's been blown off the failures of multiculturalism. And I don't think anybody does have an answer to that, but certainly lying about it, pretending it's not true, is not the answer. However, I do think there's one thing that Starmer is right about, and parts of this report are right about, which is this idea of the lone wolf that isn't particularly Islamist or extreme right or not ideologically driven, or not in a traditional sense. There isn't a kind of coherent worldview underlying their extremism and violence. I do think that is going to be a growing threat because of the internet and how children, particularly and young men, use the internet. So obviously the Southport murderer was an example of that. But I think there's been a fourfold increase of children convicted of terrorism in the last 10 years. And that is a very, very mixed picture. They are not, majority of adults convicted of terrorism absolutely are Islamists. Not the case for children. It's much more mixed picture. Some of them far right, some of them incels, some of them Islamists. Yes, but it's really an obsession, almost an addiction to violence that they've come across online and are now at risk of perpetrating. So I do think that's an important factor. I don't think we should dismiss that just because it's not the common thing in the adult population. And also, it calls into question our treatment of the mentally ill, or particularly people with psychiatric conditions. I mean, certainly before the 1960s, we would incarcerate, constrain people with psychological problems that we thought might lead to them being violent. So we would take away their individual liberty to protect the public. We don't do that anymore. We treat people in the community. Very obvious humane reasons for that. But you have got to question if someone is so severely mentally ill, disturbed, whatever you want to call it, that they are going out hitting someone with a hockey stick at their school, threatening violence, their parents are that concerned about, should they be free?
Yeah.
And a very similar case, I think, is Valdo Calacane, who stabbed 3 people to death in Nottingham a few years ago. This young man was severely mentally disturbed. He was a paranoid schizophrenic. He was known to the authorities to have been various violent incidents. He was known not to have been engaging, not taking his medication. I think anyone, you can be as supportive of care in the community and trying to make sure people who are struggling with severe mental health issues are treated as humanely as possible, and recognise there's a certain point in which a line is crossed. And the fact that wasn't recognised here, that there was a kind of, well, he's not an extremist, so therefore on your merry way, let's see how it goes. It will strike anyone as completely misplaced. On the point about integration, I think you're right to say that it's a misnomer, particularly when you're talking about the Islamist problem, but for slightly different reasons. I think, the vast majority of Muslim communities in Britain do not need to be integrated into the idea that you shouldn't blow people up.
No, absolutely.
Or do not need to be integrated into the idea that grooming gangs are a horrific scandal. I think the issue where Islamism in particular is concerned is that there's just a fundamental lack of seriousness with tackling it for all of the politically correct reasons that we're talking about. I mean, you think about something like the Manchester Arena bombing, whereby the kind of, it's a combination of either ineptitude or kind of collective naivety, which seems to greet a lot of these terrorists. They're going for some of them, in some cases it's prevent. In the case of Manchester Arena, it was MI5. He was under surveillance, and yet the ease with which he was travelling back and forth from Libya, where he was believed to have been received training by the Libyan Islamic fighting group, of which his father was a member. The fact that these things are allowed to go on without it actually triggering some kind of intervention, you do come back to the position, which is that time and again, the authorities, the political class, are more interested in protecting the reputation of multiculturalism than stopping kids from being abused or blown up.
Absolutely.
And people are within their rights to come to that conclusion now without falling victim to a far-right extremist narrative or whatever.
But I do I completely agree with you, but I do think there are also questions about Islam or ordinary Islam. I mean, of course, I am not calling all British Muslims Islamists, and absolutely many British Muslims will be absolutely horrified by the grooming gangs and also the many Islamic extremist plots and things like that we've experienced. But for example, the attitude of Islam to women, that's not, in many cases, especially conservative Islam, that's not particularly compatible with Western culture. 25% of British Muslims don't believe Hamas raped and killed on October the 7th. 25%. That's not a tiny fraction. Now, speaking as a person of faith myself, if I moved to another country, would I adapt my religious beliefs to suit the country? No, I wouldn't, because my faith is more important to me than another political system. I think these are reasonable questions to ask that should be done absolutely in a sensitive way, and completely acknowledging the fact that most Muslims make a contribution to society. They've come here legally, like the vast majority of people. strongly believe in their families, communities like we do, but we should be able to have a discussion about what are the values of different religions, at what point do they clash, and what do we do about it?
And it's also quite clear that over time, the multicultural state has boosted the most hardline conservative and in some cases extreme factions within Islam. I mean, through this whole practice of funding supposedly representative community groups, anointing supposed community leaders, time and time again, the people that the state has chosen to anoint are the most hardline regressive individuals who then claim to speak on behalf of the entire community, who then really set the tone of the debate about what needs to be done about certain issues which might be affecting that community or emanating from that particular community. So it becomes a kind of real vicious circle, I suppose.
And they reinforce people's prejudices.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you end up in the same position. So it's just, at the core of all this is a nervousness about talking about it and confronting it.
Yeah.
And if we got rid of that, then we could actually start to have those difficult but obviously sensitive conversations as to how we navigate our way out of this in a liberal fashion, I suppose.
I'm always amused. This story comes up every now and again. They'll find an extremist group operating in Britain legally that's banned in Qatar and various other Islamic countries.